So Howard Schultz had his CNN town hall last night, and it didn't go very well. Schultz was the ex-CEO of Starbucks, a very successful guy, built the company up from a very small local chain into an international brand. Had a great chance last night to promote himself and get his name out there to a lot of Americans, even though he's not officially running for president, which makes me question why CNN would give him so much airtime. But nonetheless, I do applaud them for stepping outside of the two-party duopoly and giving some time to independent candidates. I think they did the same thing with Gary Johnson in 2016, and frankly, Schultz did not make much better use of of the opportunity granted to him by CNN than Johnson did. If you remember, Johnson went out there and pretty much looked like a buffoon, alienated everybody, including his own base. Schultz, on the other hand, did alienate just about everybody, but he doesn't have a base. The reason for that, I think, is that Schultz is running kind of as the candidate of 2004. I think that if Schultz would have been quite an interesting candidate if he had run in 2004 between, George W. Bush and John Kerry. I think that he very well could have positioned himself between those two men based on his policies, except for a couple areas where he's maybe a little radical for 2004 standards, but certainly by the standards of 2019, Schultz to say mushy middle isn't really correct, because he's too right-wing for the left, and he's far too left-wing for the right. So I guess his positions aren't mushy in many cases. I mean, certainly on guns, he's quite frightening for a lot of people, because he is talking about gun confiscation. But he says, well, I respect the Second Amendment, and I think people should be able to own guns, but not all guns. And there's some guns we just got to get rid of. And as soon as you say that, you alienate a good half of the country, because guns are and many other issues are what we call wedge issues. Now, a wedge issue is something where there is no negotiation on either side. That's something where the political discourse is broken down, and you cannot discuss things rationally, because there are really two positions that people hold. Anybody who's going to care about the issue one way or the other is going to have their position. And if you either need to line up with one side or the other if you're going to take a position. Guns, by coming out the way he did, he sounds way too pro-gun for the anti-gun people, because he said he respects the Second Amendment. But then for the pro-gun people, he sounds like a gun grabber, because he's saying he's going to go and grab guns. And for the people in the middle who don't really care one way or the other, his position on guns is not going to affect them one way or the other. So the fact that he's come out and he said, well, I don't want to take away all guns, but I also don't want to let people keep all guns, you've gained no more supporters. The kind of people who hold that position don't care about guns to begin with, and so there's no point in even talking about it. Schultz should just say he should not take any position at all on guns, and frankly, he should do this with all the wedge issues. I mean, it's the same thing with tranny restrooms and all the other stuff that kind of doesn't matter. Wedge issues exist so that candidates on one side or another of the aisle can rally up the base. Well, Schultz is by alienating 100% of the country, it leaves himself with no base. The gamble that Schultz is making here is that, well, if I come out and I sound reasonable to everybody, well, then I'm going to just pick up a lot of votes from people who think that one side or the other just sounds a little too crazy, and he's running kind of as the return to normalcy guy. But we're not living in normal times, and people don't want to live in normal times. People don't, even though there might be some Democrats in the era of Trump who look nostalgically back on George W. Bush, if George W. Bush ran for president today as an independent, he would not be picking up any votes from the left. Schultz's big problem that I saw last night is that by taking the sorts of positions that he did, by taking positions that are not on wedge issues that are neither on one side or the other clearly, he's really inspired no one, because you can't be a leader if you're just sort of taking the middle position on things. You just sort of sound like a follower at that point. You're saying, well, a lot of people think X is more reasonable than Y or Z, and so even though but when you do this, you fail to present any sort of clear vision as to what you believe. Schultz has no theory, really, of what America should be. He just sort of is stuck in the middle, frankly. What you're having from the left and the right of America today are two very different views of what America represents and what it ought to be. Trump did a good job presenting to people what he thinks that the right-wing vision of America is. And the left, their challenge in 2020 will be presenting the left-wing vision of America. And Schultz's vision of America really is 2004, which is something that doesn't exist anymore. We're not going back to the days where you had folks like Joe Lieberman and John McCain, politely disagreeing over minor policy distinctions. Even though to a great extent the two parties are not greatly divided on a lot of issues, they are culturally, even if politically they're not that divided. And even though Schultz is clearly an outsider and has never run for political office, he in many ways embodies the sensibilities of the establishment of the two parties. Because frankly, most of the party establishments, once they get entrenched in power, their goal is to just sort of hang on and scrape by every 4 years and win re-election, or 2 to 6 years, however, depending on whether they're in the House, the Senate, or governor. And the way a lot of these entrenched politicians do this is by looking inoffensive to most of their constituents, so that way they aren't motivated to go out and vote against them, because that's typically how people get voted out of office. You don't get voted out of office because you're boring. You get voted out of office because you're too exciting. Well, it's the opposite when you're trying to get elected for the first time, like Schultz is. The way you get elected for the first time is by inspiring people. You can't inspire people to get out and vote for you by being inoffensive. That inspires people really to sit on their couch and go, it wouldn't be too bad if that guy won, but nobody's going to get out and try and campaign for you passionately. Nobody's going to knock doors for Howard Schultz because they think he has this great vision of what America ought to be, because he doesn't. And he knows that he can't take a position, that he cannot hold any grand theory as to what America is or what it ought to be, because then he'll end up looking like he's on either the left or the right, because the left and the right have very clear visions of where they think the country ought to go, where it's been, what it should look like. And Schultz knows that he can't be a centrist if he embraces either of those two views. So his only option left is presenting no vision and being boring and, frankly, a failure, which is what he'll end up being. He's in many ways the anti-Ross Perot, because Ross Perot came in during a time when both parties were really putting up candidates like Howard Schultz. If you look at George H.W. Bush and Howard Schultz, they're not hugely different in terms of their style. They are generally considered nice guys who are successful in life, and they just sort of want to plot along as president and manage the country, or you manage the government as it exists. They don't really have any great vision for what should change if there's anything wrong in the country. And at that time, that for a lot of people, they thought, hey, things are going good. We just won the Cold War. That's not such a bad thing. And Bill Clinton, even though he was running against George H.W. Bush, he wasn't the most, how should I say, he wasn't exactly a radical. He was running as the fresh face. Ross Perot, on the other hand, came in. He was an older guy. He had a lot of money. He thought there were a lot of problems with America, and he wanted to get in and fix them. And he ran as an independent, got a significant amount of vote. Didn't come anywhere near to winning any of the states, but he got a lot of support. And the reason for that, the reason why Perot was able to shake people and get them to break out of their two-party mindset, was because he was inspiring. He was saying something different. Even if you didn't agree with Ross Perot, you knew where he stood. He actually had ideas. He had an idea of what America should be, what was wrong, and what he was going to do to fix it. Schultz has none of these things. There's no reason for you, if you're stuck in the two-party system, there's no reason with what Schultz is doing. He's giving people no incentive to break out of that and try and vote for him, because odds are, even if you might hold relatively moderate views, you're still going to fall into either the left or right category as far as views of what America ought to be. And frankly, that's what 2016 came down to, was people wanted to preserve their vision of America. People voted for Trump because they thought that if Hillary got in, she'd turn us into a left-wing hellhole, and people voted for Hillary because they thought that Trump would turn us into a right-wing hellhole. Where politicians have managed to rile people up over the last few years, maybe decade or two, and say, come out with the famous line, cliche that, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And the reason why they say it is that, if the other party wins, then America's done for. And a lot of people really buy into this. And Howard Schultz coming in as the mushy middle guy and saying, hey, why don't we just plod along as we've been doing? People will get, people look at every election as an existential crisis. So yeah, Schultz is a man of the past, and frankly, he's a dead man walking for president. Yeah, he's not running for anything. At least, he's not in the game. He won't stir things up. I don't think he'll even make that much of a dent as far as splitting the vote. I think he's going to end up a lot like Gary Johnson, because that's who he sounds like to me. Of course, different policies, but you have to think about his overall appeal, because that's how people judge. People don't really judge candidates as much as in individual positions. They judge their persona. They try and get a feel for people as to who they are as a person. And Howard Schultz does not come across as a strong leader in any sense. He doesn't seem to have any idea of what he wants. And if people can't discern any strong qualities from the man, then they don't know what they're voting for, and they're not going to get out for him. It's as simple as that.